All right, y'all, we got a little Noam Chomsky action here. He did an interview with the New Statesman, and he talked about a wide variety of topics. Here are his comments on the Russian war in Ukraine.
What is our goal? Do we want to escalate the war? More Ukrainians die? More destruction? Or do we want to move towards a peaceful negotiated settlement? One of the most respected individuals in the U.S. diplomatic corps, Ambassador Chaz Freeman, highly respected, properly individual with a wonderful record. A couple days ago, he came out in an interview and said, U.S. policy seems to be to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. That's the policy. We'll keep, if we've formulated no feasible goals that can lead to an exit from this tragedy. So we can keep pouring in arms, we're good at that, to escalate the fighting. More Ukrainians will die, more Russians will die, goes nowhere, just towards further escalation. Well, is there a possible diplomatic settlement? Yes, there is. Chaz Freeman outlined it once again. Everyone knows what it is. The settlement, this has been going on for 30 years, I should say, not just started today. The settlement is, in rough outline, a neutralized Ukraine, not part of a military bloc, and an internal settlement that will guarantee the rights of the Russian-speaking minority, provide probably some form of federal solution like Switzerland, Belgium, others, in which minority groups have a degree of autonomy in their own regions. It's actually formulated in an agreement called Minsk II. Some version of that has to be the possible outcome. And as Freeman again stressed, if we don't want to just fight to the last Ukrainian, we have to offer Vladimir Putin an escape hatch. He has to have some way to escape from this without what amounts to suicide. If we tell him, or if we send our current message, you're going to face war crimes trials. Nothing you can do about it. The sanctions will continue no matter what happens. We're telling him, fight on to the last Ukrainian. It might sound bold and, Winston Churchill impersonation. Sounds very heroic, but for the Ukrainians, it's a death warrant.
Okay, so interesting comments. I largely agree with him. I don't think the U.S. is truly interested in a diplomatic negotiated settlement. I guess where I might differ is that at this moment, Russia is not interested in that either. All signs indicate that as well, and he didn't comment on that portion of it. Because the things that he lays out there as like, well, look, here's the off-ramp, here's what a settlement could look like. These concessions have already been made by Ukraine, and in fact, they've been made a number of times. So even before the invasion, you had Zelensky say, okay, it's basically a dream for us to be part of NATO. It's not going to happen. Then he said it more forcefully, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after the invasion. And then he said it again a third time he did an interview with Russian media where he said that. There's a number of concessions that the Ukrainians are making. They're saying, look, we're not going to be part of NATO, so we're going to be neutral. And then we're going to have a conversation about the areas that are currently occupied by Russia, coming up with some sort of agreement around that, where, for example, Russia might keep Crimea in certain areas of the Donbass region that are already occupied by Russia. Maybe they'll either get autonomy or they will become part of Russia. These are things that the Ukrainians have put on the table. Now, if you say, well, the United States is sort of blocking that negotiated settlement because we're just funneling them more and more weapons, and we're talking about war crimes tribunal, and we're not even saying we're going to lift the sanctions if there is a negotiated settlement and if Putin does withdraw, and that gets in the way of peace. I agree with you on that front. I agree, and I think that's correct. But I also think, truth is always a defense, and the fact of the matter is Putin is a war criminal. So, ideally, in a world that made sense, where we really had law and order and justice was blind, you'd have George W. Bush and Dick Cheney sitting behind bars, but you'd also have Vladimir Putin sitting behind bars. Now, we don't live in that ideal world, which is a shame, but at least from my perspective now, looking at the way everything's unfolded, it strikes me that the Ukrainians are genuinely making concessions and being clear about those concessions. The one thing they won't do, which I think they're correct not to do, is to totally disarm. Like, that is absolute suicide, and they're correct to not put that on the table. But they've basically given almost every other concession under the sun, and Russia still hasn't withdrawn, even given those concessions. So, look, what that tells me is, and this is why I don't think Russia necessarily is as interested in peace, and I don't think the U.S. is as interested in peace. What that tells me is Russia has more expansionist goals. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, but there was natural gas found off the coast of Crimea in 2012, and then in 2014, you had Russia go in and take Crimea. We now know that there's massive natural gas deposits, not only in eastern Ukraine, but also in western Ukraine. So I think in Putin's heart of hearts, he wanted all of Ukraine, and he may have genuinely thought we're going to be greeted as liberators. He may have drunk, propagandistic Kool-Aid thinking like, no, seriously, if we go in there, we're going to be welcomed as liberators, and people are going to remember the glorious history of the Russian people and the Ukrainian people basically being together as one. And then, of course, he had his whole spiel, his blood and soil spiel about how, look, we built them up, we funded them, they turned their backs on us, this is rightfully ours, and so basically we're going to go take it. So I think that's what Putin wants in his heart of hearts. Right now, it's not looking like that's going to be the end goal where he could take all of Ukraine. So then maybe after a while, he will settle for some sort of a negotiated settlement where he ends up getting Crimea and certain areas of the Donbass region and neutrality for NATO. But ultimately, I think he has more expansionist goals. But to Chomsky's point, I also think he's correct about the U.S. So there are parts of this that I think Chomsky is missing, like a lot of these things are already on the table and Russia hasn't agreed to them. But like he's correct about the U.S. The sense I get from the U.S. is the U.S. government knows it can't, send in SEAL Team 6 and topple Vladimir Putin. We can't treat Russia in the same way that we treated Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a nuclear-armed power. And so instead of actually doing regime change, I think the idea is the West is fine basically trying to bleed out Russia and trying to get them mired in a decade-long war in Ukraine and destroying their economy in the process and their global standing in the process. And I think the evidence to that effect is exactly what Chomsky's pointing out here, which is this idea that we're not talking about lifting sanctions if a deal is reached. We're still funneling weapons into Ukraine. There has been no off-ramp that's been offered. And there's all this talk about, Putin being a war criminal and that he should stand trial. And it's like, you know what? Fair enough. He is a war criminal. He should stand trial. But if that's the message that you're sending right now, then you're providing zero incentive to actually find a diplomatic solution to the crisis and to the war. So, I mean, there are parts of this. I think he's largely correct in his take, but I do think he has some blind spots. Yes, the U.S. is clearly right now not a partner for peace, but at the same time, Russia has been offered a lot of the things that they say they want, and they still haven't withdrawn yet. Now, it may be over time when Putin realizes he's not going to get the whole thing, he's not going to get all of Ukraine, he's not going to get every one of his demands, and maybe then he will agree to some sort of negotiated settlement that is more limited. But at least as of right now, it looks to me like Russia and the U.S. are not really partners in peace, and the victims of all of it are the Ukrainians. So I think, look, he's brilliant, Noam Chomsky. He's, I think, one of the most, or the most quoted intellectual living. So I think everything he says carries a lot of weight. I think he's largely correct here, but I do think there are some tiny blind spots as well. So now, let's look at the next portion, see what we got here.
We're approaching the most dangerous point in human history. The first article I wrote, at least that I can remember, was in 5th grade. I was 10 years old. I can date it very easily because of the time and the topic. It was an article about the fall of Barcelona. It was an article for the elementary school newspaper. I was the editor, probably the only reader, maybe my mother. The article I hardly remember. It was about the fall of Austria, fall of Czechoslovakia, fall of Toledo, now the fall of Barcelona. Looks like the grim cloud of fascism is spreading over the whole world, inexorable. Well, that was February 1939. Haven't changed my opinion since. It's just gotten worse. The doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, under Trump, they abandoned minutes, moved to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight. That's where it is now, because the threats are accumulating. We're approaching the most dangerous point in human history. Nothing like it before. We are now facing the prospect of destruction of organized human life on Earth from environmental destruction, and not in the remote future. We are approaching irreversible turning turning points which will not be cannot be dealt with any longer. Doesn't mean everybody's going to die, but it's going to mean moving to a future in which the lucky ones will be those who die more quickly.
Damn. So I don't know. The context of this didn't make it clear. He was either referring to like nuclear war or climate change. I don't know which one he was referring to in such apocalyptic terms, but it definitely gives you pause when you see, a guy as brilliant as Noam Chomsky basically saying, like, run for the hills. It's getting really bad. We're, like, nanoseconds away from midnight on the doomsday clock. I don't know if he's talking about climate change or nuclear war, but I definitely don't think many people realize just how much we're playing with fire right now in terms of nuclear war with what's going on with Russia. All these like little tit-for-tat escalations they're actually a gigantic deal because it spiraled out of control to some extent already, but it can get much, much worse. We just sanctioned Putin's daughters the other day. His daughters. Like, I mean, they didn't do anything wrong. Like, I don't understand. Why would you do that? Are they guilty just because, their father is Vladimir Putin? I mean, when I think of the shit my dad believed and some of the shit my dad did, it's like, I can't, why would I be guilty based on what he did? So I didn't think that was fair. And, the spiraling out of control is a real concern. And I think, unfortunately, people are very blasé about it and nonchalant about it when they should heed the warning here. So anyway, I'm sure the rest of the interview with Noam Chomsky is equally as fascinating. But there you have it. He's commenting on the state of Russia and Ukraine. He's commenting on the future of civilization on Earth. And also, I guess he talked about Trump. He talked about a variety of things. I'll probably watch the entire interview, but I just wanted to give you guys a little taste of it here.